Any advice for someone starting a university archives from scratch? We have a physical room and items to go into the archives, but that's it. We need fixtures, processing materials, scanners, etc. And yes, I definitely know what you're talking about. So, a little background here. I started my career at the Smithsonian and I was at the Freer Sackler Gallery of Art, which I believe they are now calling the National Asian Art Museum. And the archives there was somebody who was head of archives. They didn't have an archivist for at least a few years. And so a lot of the regular archivist activities had been pretty dormant, not a lot of outreach activity happening. And so they were bringing me on board to help revive that program. And then when I went to work at Linfield, even though the college was 150 years old plus, I was the first archivist. There had been some history projects and some things done, but never by a trained professional, and never was there one in the archives. So both were fairly big jobs to either revive a program or start a program from scratch, which also meant that if there was a budget, which for one of them there wasn't for a while, that it was pretty minimal. And so any supplies that I needed, any like if I wanted to try and hire student interns or employees, that all costs money, right? So I have been there. And so based on that, I have a couple different strategies and advice for you. So the first one is education, and you may have already done this, but we often, especially as subject matter experts and people actually on the ground dealing with this, need to educate up. And so many organizations, if they are adding in an archives or trying to get an archives program started that was kind of already there, but not really, they really have no concept of how much energy, structure, and money is needed to have a fully functional archives or museum collection program and what it takes to get that going, let alone maintaining. And because they are collection items, they need special storage, whether that's containers or climate controlled storage room, let alone collections management systems and digitization equipment. So all of these things cost money. I run into so many situations, both as a traditional employee and as a consultant, where the people who were in charge of getting that started, that were not archivists, but were in charge of hiring archivists to get it started, really had no accurate idea of how much that costs. So we need to start out with some education there and sharing some numbers. And part of that education process that I have found to be helpful and effective is actually doing some peer comparisons. One of the first things that I did when I was at Linfield was take a look at what my neighboring archives looked like, what sort of size space did they have, what budget lines did they have, how many FTE did they have, and how that compared to what was on the ground at Linfield. So that can sometimes be a very easily conveyed slash comparison tool that can also help hopefully be a bit of an instigator into helping you get the resources you need. My second suggestion is to help break it out, especially if you're trying to start an archives from scratch. It means that the amount of stuff that you need is a lot. And sometimes you just can't get it all at once. So breaking it out and moving into that next step, prioritizing what it is that you need based on what your situation is, based on what is happening with the collections, based on what other resources you might have access to, will determine how you should be prioritizing that collection. Maybe it makes sense that the priority is just getting them in a different storage room and different containers, or maybe they're in pretty good condition, but you have a tighter resource where you could get a collections management system in earlier than maybe you could buy supplies, and that makes sense, and so you do that instead. So prioritize based on what your situation is. And then for the fourth piece of advice, try and build synergy and incentives. So if there are partners that are particularly interested, that bring resources to help you do a part of a project, if there's a way to incentivize, whether it's your larger organization or a donor or community, if there are projects that are particularly interesting or they really make sense for you to do, like if it's an anniversary, for example, finding what those things are and pursuing those first will help make your job easier. And then you can go back and ask for other things that you need.